is the mayor of a neighboring community, Gary, Indiana. He is a native Chicagoan, a graduate of Concordia College in River Forest. He received his law degree from Valparaiso University Law School. In 1996, Newsweek magazine named our guest today as one of the top 25 most dynamic mayors in America. 5 quick points about Gary. Number 1, crime is down. Number 2, the finances are in good shape. Number 3, the Miss Universe contest was in Gary for the first of 3 years running. Number 4, the city now has a minor league basketball team. Construction is to begin any day on that stadium. And number 5, the Gary-Chicago Airport is now a household name. Our guest today is a mayor who gets things done. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the City Club of Chicago, the mayor of Gary, Indiana, Mayor Scott King. Your Honor.
Well, I want to thank you for that introduction, and I owe an apology to our hosts, who I saw nervously watching the door as noon came and went, but customs and immigration at the state line took longer than I anticipated. And of course, Mayor Daley's out of town, so I couldn't make that phone call. Obviously, I say that jokingly, but if one listens to some of the rhetoric that has been out there for the last several months by particularly an airport issue, pro-Peatone advocates, if you were in my shoes, you would have debated whether or not your grasp of your native tongue was adequate or should you bring a translator. I wrestled with this, and here goes. How you doing? All right, it's working. You know, I was born in the city, Lutheran Deaconess Hospital, Washtenaw Avenue. I grew up in the Shabona Park neighborhood, Belmont and Harlem. And being from a 7-vote, of course, Democratic family in those days, my first exposure to politics was at the ripe age of 15, when for a summer job I was given my instructions to report to the bookend tandem of Parkey and Willie Cullerton, my alderman and ward committeeman, to get my letter for my summer job. And if you don't know what a letter is, it's something like an ambassador presenting his portfolio upon going to a country. If you wanted to get a job in those days with the city, in my case the Park District, one had one's letter and that's what one presented. After graduating, my first exposure to Northwest Indiana was law school. In 1978, I moved into more rural Lake County, which is the county in which Gary's located. And I kept asking my colleagues as a young deputy prosecuting attorney, what about Gary? What about living in Gary? I looked at a map and it was on Lake Michigan, and I, having come from Chicago, kind of fond of Lake Michigan, and was told for quite a time, well, no, you don't want to look at Gary, you don't want to look in Gary. Well, finally I was able to buy a home in 1980, moved there, and have certainly never regretted it since. The city. Contrary to popular belief, the city of Gary is not named after the person you sat next to in 3rd grade. It is named after the man who was the chairman of the board of U.S. Steel at the turn of the century. U.S. Steel was formed in a boardroom in New York and in the city of Pittsburgh, and the decision was made, and of course that's the height of railroad expansion, they needed a Midwest facility. So they sent their real estate agents out. Interestingly enough, the final 2 sites were a toss-up between what is now Gary and Waukegan. But the real estate agents in Northwest Indiana did a little more effective job of grabbing land cheap and ended up with 7 miles of Lake Michigan's southern shoreline. They transformed it in an incredibly short period of time. Dunes, really scrub sort of country, into the world's largest integrated steel mill. Integrated means they start with raw materials, and they move east to west during the 7 miles and end up with finished steel products at the other end. At its height, U.S. Steel employed more than 25,000 people at the Gary facility. This trend began to go the other direction as we went into the late 1960s. At its height, Gary Works represented the majority of the property tax base in the city of Gary. Sadly, however, during its economic history, in the early 20s and into the 30s, U.S. Steel resisted diversification of the economic base for fear of its impact on competition for the labor market. Part of that legacy has left us with this circumstance today. They still occupy a position of approximately 50% of the property tax base. However, what was once 25,000 employees, most of whom lived in the city, today are 7,500 employees, only 1/3 of whom, or 2,500, live in the city. But yet and still, they represent 50% of the tax base. Indiana, one difference that is a valid comparison to the state of Illinois. The state of Indiana relies heavily on property taxes as a funding mechanism for local government, be it at the county level, city, town, what have you. As a result, the state, the entire state, but particularly Northwest Indiana, the metropolitan area of the Gary metropolitan area, with a heavy reliance on heavy industry, is really going through a time of transition, because property taxes have reached a point where they render some of these industries, at some of their most trying times due to issues affecting the steel industry in particular in the global economy, in a non-competitive position given the cost of them bearing this level of property taxes. And it's an issue that we are continuing to wrestle with, not only at the local level but at the state level as well. Unlike communities in Illinois, in the state of Indiana, local communities do not enjoy real home rule. There's a statute in our legislature that says we have home rule, but only where the legislature hasn't addressed an issue, and unfortunately they've been a chatty group in our state. So we pretty much do have permission to turn off lights when necessary, and that's about it. But we have a difficulty in terms of diversification, our ability at a local level to diversify revenue sources. One of the most impactful things that's happened in our community on the revenue side has been the advent of casino gaming. It really took off 5 years ago. It's when the first casinos opened. And what it has ended up is generating for the city, whose annual budget previously was around $60 million in revenues across all lines, pumping an additional $25 million per year direct revenue into the city. Now, we made a decision at the outset, and that was we were not going to use that revenue for operations. We were going to use it to get our financial house in order, which was a daunting challenge. We were going to use it to reinvest in our infrastructure, rebuild public safety. And I'm proud to say that working in concert with our city council, we have been able to do it. We emerged debt-free the beginning January 1st, the year 2000. We paid our way out of enormous sums of indebtedness. We embarked on a public safety program that has had a dramatic impact and effect. The year I took office, we had in excess of 110 homicides for a population of about 110,000. So you can appreciate on a per capita basis what an impact that had. One of the reasons was, first of all, there had been a systematic disinvestment in police services in the city, going back for 2 previous administrations. Our officers were the lowest paid anywhere around. Now, we addressed that and were able to, in my first term, increase salary levels of police by 40%. We were able to buy new equipment. We were able to increase the size of the force from 204 when I took office to a current 286 with a goal of 305 officers. We also, and this came to be as a result of a meeting I had, early in my tenure as mayor, I sat with the leadership of federal law enforcement and state and county and you name it, and said, look, this isn't working what we're doing in terms of attacking crime, and particularly violent crime. And they said, well, what do you mean? And they started rattling off. Well, we got this task force, we got that task force, we got this task force. And I said, that's the problem. Everybody's got a task force. The task forces aren't talking one to the other. The criminals are better organized than we are in government. It was with the then Attorney General, Janet Reno, in September of 1996, who stepped forward and created an innovative program where for the first time, federal agencies led by the FBI took a bottom-up approach to violent crime stemming from illegal drug activities. Became known as GRIT, Gary Response Investigative Team. And its impact has been to coordinate resources, including our own department, all the way through and including FBI, and it's become something of a model for other communities. It really has worked. But of course we've been blessed as well by an improvement in the economy, not only nationally, but locally. One of the other things that casinos did was create jobs. It has now become our second highest employer. And a wide array of jobs, permitting entry-level positions up to and including management positions. It has permitted us to see a significant increase, it has contributed to a significant increase in new housing starts and an increase in the number of owner-occupied properties, which is critical to rebuild any community. People take better care and have a greater stake in what they own than what they rent. If you don't believe me, take a picture of the next car you rent when you're getting ready to turn it in compared to your own. Of course, in my case, that actually might be an improvement. We feel good about where we are at. With the decline of the steel industry that I mentioned before, we've seen this dramatic reduction in employment. But what we have also seen is a reduction in the amount of land required for them to maintain their production levels of steel, in large part due to automation in their process. What once was 7 miles, beginning with our northwestern corner at Buffington Harbor, which is where the casinos are located, directly north of where our airport is now, we obtained 200 acres on that far northwest corner. We're in discussion for another 250 acres of lakefront land with U.S. Steel on the west side. On the east side, there are 400 acres that are vacant. Now, all of this acreage presents, in some cases, some challenges on environmental issues, but none of them insurmountable. Our strategy, our key strategy in rebuilding the city of Gary is reconnecting with our waterfront. In Chicago, you had the wisdom and the vision of Burnham, who set aside parkland along the lake. Ours was what I still refer to as some of the great corporate minds of the 19th century, U.S. Steel, who said it's a lot more convenient for us to be on the lake. As a result, I have people that live in this city, Chicago, that have commuted to their family cottage in Michigan for decades, and until they stopped by for some reason on business to see me, didn't know Gary was on Lake Michigan. You can't see it unless you turn left at the McDonald's in Miller. We are working diligently to reconnect with that waterfront, and again, the success of casinos has helped prove that people will come and will be drawn to waterfront development. We've begun the process of demolition for construction of hotels, commercial, retail properties, a convention center on this 200-acre parcel we currently occupy now with Don Barden, one of the two casino operators. We anticipate other development and projects, including upscale housing in our city. I'd like to turn for the airport against this backdrop. First of all, it is critical from my perspective that elected leadership on both sides of the state line figure out what the people we serve have already figured out. And that is that by and large, a state border is an invisible boundary. It is not a barrier. I say this because early interpretation of census data shows almost 50,000 people a day are crossing that state line to go from home to work, most from Northwest Indiana into Chicago, the Chicago metropolitan area, approximately 33,000. But 11,000 from the Chicago metropolitan area into the Gary metropolitan area, which is Lake, Porter, and LaPorte counties. They already get it. For recreational purposes, yes, including casino gaming. The statistics show that that state line is no barrier, no boundary at all. Now, one of the focal points we've had in our city is kind of back to the future. Why did U.S. Steel choose this? And it was by and large based on transportation modalities. At the time, the lake, to bring ore boats down, rail, and to some extent, a road system. Today, what do we have? We still have the lake. We still have the rail, at times more than I wish we had. We have 3 interstate highways, and we have an airport. Now, about 6 years ago, Mayor Daley took the initiative, and using the federal statutory basis that formed the New York Port Authority partnership between New York and New Jersey, created the Chicago-Gary Regional Air Authority, bringing Meigs, O'Hare, Midway, and the Gary Airport, now the Gary-Chicago Airport, under one umbrella. Now, there's all sorts of reasons why the mayor did that. But included in that was his ability to see that this is a real airport that is accessible and usable by a substantial portion of the Chicago metropolitan population as well as the Gary metropolitan population at a time when air passenger travel has never faced the number and the significant short-term challenges that it does today. It is an unacceptable circumstance in many instances that is starting to have substantial and very direct economic circumstances. And that is the inability today to keep pace with the demand for flying, for traveling by air. Let me give you one small example in talking to a business person in our community. They have now, to avoid the risk of their salespeople, their representatives, missing a midday meeting, are now, as a matter of course, flying out, leaving the day before to maximize their opportunity for a meeting. They're picking up a hotel cost that wasn't in the budget the year before. Now, it's against this backdrop that we've seen during I think my entire tenure. We've seen the, oh no, Gary can't serve us. And it's been a host of reasons. Reason number one, it can't serve us because there's this 1984 to 81 study back during the Lake Calumet and the third airport debate, right? Showing all of these obstacles that can't possibly be overcome in order to make it an effective airport. Well, guess what? We did a new master plan. Same place, same airport. Those obstacles are in most cases eliminated, and in the remaining cases scaled down to a point where it is actually value added to be able to redevelop some brownfield properties. We have avoided the impact of Superfund sites and some of these other challenges that were 15 years ago insurmountable. To end up with what? To end up with O'Hare? No. We don't need another O'Hare. What we need is an airport that can serve South Chicago metropolitan area and Northwest Indiana metropolitan area for regional travel purposes. I don't need to go to Gary Chicago Airport and board a nonstop for Paris. But it would be nice to get and board a nonstop for Washington. I would like to, coming from our metropolitan area, and I think I can speak for many in the southern portion of the Chicago metropolitan area, have some options on short flights that would permit me to drive a shorter period of time than I'm in the air. That would be a nice experience. Look at what the city of Chicago has done at Midway. It's been a fantastic undertaking. Look at the level of activity, air travel as well as secondary economic impact, that's happening today at Midway. Is that just some podunk airport? I don't think so. And guess what? Our runway in the ground today at Gary Chicago is longer than any runway at Midway. Us too small an area, it was fascinating. 6 months ago, the height of the Piatone spinning, it was, well, they can never be this mega airport that we have designed. And then when it was, well, you know, economic impact environmental impact statements, et cetera, they immediately shifted gears for economic and environmental reasons. They scaled it down to a one runway, 12-gate airport and said, well, here, this we can do at Piatone. We already have that at Gary. It's in the ground. More acreage today in the footprint of the Gary Chicago Airport, not what we're planning in phase 2, today, than LaGuardia Airport. Hardly a podunk operation. Infrastructure is critical. You can have a beautiful airport, but if you can't drive to it, if you can't get to it by rail, it's really not going to work very well. There's not a lot of hikers into an airport. We have, as I mentioned earlier, 3 interstates. We have the South Shore Light Rail System. We have the capacity here and now to address problems here and now. Now, does that mean I stand here saying we can never talk about new airport construction anywhere? No. But what I'm saying is our problem is today. It's not 5, 10, 15, 20 years from today. The increase we're seeing in air rage and all these other issues and lost time and lost productivity, it's today. It's not because airlines are evil and they're trying to get us mad at them. It's not for any other reason than for right now we've sort of outpaced our supply lines. And now it seems to me to make all the logical sense in the world, look at effective coordinated management of existing assets in terms of these airports, the Midway, Rockford, Milwaukee, O'Hare, and the Gary Chicago Airport. Because doing that, I strongly believe, particularly against the backdrop of the advent and the increased availability and popularity of regional jet travel, the 50-seaters, if you will, for 600-mile or less travel, an opportunity for airlines, for government to sit together and work out something now while we look 15 and 20 years in the future has never been greater than it is today, and it's at the end of the day what I advocate, what we have to do. I'm watching remarkable slippage in estimates of how long it takes to build new airports. My goodness, you know, I didn't know it was that easy. You know, just, you know, instant runways. Add water and they unfold and they pop out like the dinosaur eggs my kids are so fond of. The truth is, and this was in one of the Chicago papers last week, Detroit Metropolitan Airport. unanimity of agreement to build a new runway at their airport. Everybody agreed. Nobody disagreed. They had the land. No major environmental issues. They're in their 12th year of building the new runway. And if you fly over it, they're actually building the runway. I mean, nobody's goofing around. It's taken them 12 years against that backdrop. The American public, the American taxpayer, the American consumer, all the same person, have remarkable attributes. But that level of patience is not one of them in my life's experience. The leadership exhibited by the city of Chicago, by Mayor Daley, by the airports, the leadership exhibited on our side of the state line, I think can prove to be a model that I hope solves the dilemma for the traveling public today. I hope also provides a springboard for us to recognize something. If we redrew state lines today based on economic mapping rather than geography or politics, I think there'd be a very different picture presented of Northwest Indiana and Northeast Illinois. The Gary metropolitan area, the Lake, Porter, LaPorte counties, is something of the red-haired stepchild of the state of Indiana. We're on a different time zone than the rest of the state. I mean, I don't know how deliberate that was, but we are. You know, everybody else roots for the Pacers, we root for the Bulls. You know, they root for the Colts, and if we get a few breaks, we're gonna start rooting for the Bears. So we have this identification from Northwest Indiana with Chicago. We turn on the news at 10, it's your news at 10. This is who we are, this is what we're about, and this is what the people we serve, whether in the private or public sector, this is what they're about. We've got to do a better job of erasing that line. I don't think it's beneficial, and I was chagrined to hear a quote attributed to your governor about just dismissing the prospect of even looking at cross-state development because it's not in Illinois. Well, come on. We've got to get past that. That's not following any kind of economic reality. Do you know the city of Chicago, I think a top financial firm, rated cities if they were states, cities if they were countries, based on their economies? This city, Chicago, this city would not only fare excellently, I think come out certainly in the top third, ranked among states just based on its own economy, but doesn't do too badly as a country economically. The combined logic of all these propositions, the need, the economics of it, which are essential, and certainly the desires of the people we served, I think make it critical for us to forget about the state line business as much as we can, and look for a common sense solution. You know, if the private sector was looking at this, the equivalent something of a merger, or at least a joint venture, if you will, I can't believe that geography, only, other than how it impacted the economics of the deal, would prove to be a barrier. We can't let it be that in the public sector. We can't do it. And so with that, I'm inviting questions, because the host told me that I should do that. And he's asked me 2 rules. Go up to the microphone in the middle and state your name, right? Address? Is that it? Driver's license? Okay. And anyway, the microphone's right there. So.
Someone step up to the microphone, ask the first question. If not,
Yeah. Mom?
the moderator will. Mr. Mayor, as someone who drives by Gary every weekend, hasn't stopped yet, but now it's going to change. What is the current action at the Gary Airport? How many flights? How many, playing? What's the schedule? at the Gary Chicago Airport.
Okay. We have one scheduled passenger carrier in Pan Am, which is 727 service to Sanford Airport, which is north of Orlando, like the northern sort of edge of Orlando. One flight daily, is that correct? One round trip a day. Other discussions taking place, but right now, straight passenger service, that's what you can do. Of course, there is what they call general aviation, corporate, charter, et cetera. The third piece is very interesting, and I should have mentioned it earlier, is cargo. You know, this transition we're seeing to sort of next day inventory, so people aren't, you know, having to build and maintain and pay taxes on warehouses. Huge business for us, and one of the most notable customers is Ford with respect to their Chicago Heights facility. And so in evenings, we're getting quite a bit of cargo activity coming in as well. That's the lay of the land. We're hoping to have some more nice announcements in this sooner rather than later. Of course, I can't push Paul or Bill or any of the others any harder than I already am, but there's some interesting discussions that are taking place. Any other? Yes, ma'am.
As you know, I'm Joyce Saxon. I'm on the board of the City Club. As you know, we had Congressman Lipinski yesterday. Would it help your cause anyway if he got what he has proposed, that the government step in?
Yeah, I think if I read correctly, I think what the congressman said was that he is not optimistic about within Illinois there being a consensus develop, and so he believes that the federal government on the O'Hare issue is going to step in. You know, I'd love to see something develop where it's made as much at a local basis for the city of Chicago's sake, right? Because one would want to avoid the sort of camel's nose under the tent thing, and but if at the end of the day it's obvious to me that this has reached such a temperature as an issue that the word's very clear. If this doesn't happen, I would say the timeline, as I understand it, July 1st, the city is giving a plan to the governor, and I think I heard the governor say last Friday when we taped this thing on Channel 2, September 1st, looking at September 1st for a response. I suspect if it gets much beyond that, there's going to be a lot more aggression in Washington to just sort of make decisions at that level.
Joe Moore, Alderman of the 49th Ward, City of Chicago. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for your remarks. Gary obviously is very lucky to have you in the leadership there. One of the buzzwords as of late has been smart growth, and I can think of nothing that would contribute more to urban sprawl than development of an airport dozens of miles away from the central city. Could you comment a little bit more on the benefits of infill development and the economic benefits, I think, that would accrue not only to the city of Gary, but also to the southeast side of Chicago, which also is in desperate need of economic development, of locating an airport or enhancing an existing airport in a city central core rather than farm fields many, many miles away from where large numbers of people live.
And the alderman makes an excellent point. It's ironic that in an era where we have these really like dynamic recycling programs for tin cans and for newspapers, we don't seem to do the same thing with land, which is you can't make more of it. And this is a whole brownfield, smart growth issue. So here's a choice. To accomplish our long-term growth objectives at the Gary-Chicago Airport would take land that is currently vacant, in some cases polluted, clean it, and reuse it inside the setting of an existing urban environment again, with rail and road access. Contrast and compare it to, let's assume you were going to take the same blueprint to, let's use Peatone. You're talking about laying that over what is now some of the richest farmland in the world. You are talking about impacting lifestyles of that community. I am not a farm kind of guy. You know, I have reverse claustrophobia. Open space for too long makes me nervous, right? But those people made choices, in some cases generations ago, to live in Peatone, to be farmers, right? Or to live in the peace and quiet of the country, right? And so we're talking about imposing upon them and chewing up this farmland, again, which is a finite commodity. And that's building the airport, before we talk about the roads, the rail, et cetera. And then what do? There's only so much money, either from private sources or public sources, to invest in projects of this scope. If that investment is made, how do you rebuild the south side of Chicago? How do you rebuild and reuse this land, industrial land, in a Gary, Indiana, or a Hammond, or or wherever you may be? That's the smart part about smart growth. How do we maximize the use of these limited financial resources against a backdrop of limited land resources? And I appreciate you. You know, to me, it's a clear winner. Focus it and make it accessible as well to the bulk of the people that are going to be using it. Why should we continue to stretch out and stretch out and stretch out? If we do, we'll sure as heck grow, right, and spread out to meet it. I mean, that model is abundantly clear just over the last 10 years. That's why I'm not an advocate a lot of times of building more lanes on interstates, because the darn thing is, the traffic expands to the available lanes. And so I think we have to, more and more, it's going to become critical. Last piece is a water issue, too. I mean, pay attention to this. I know the city of Chicago is, but it's a dynamic in the Midwest in particular, but it's going to become a global issue. There's pressures right now to treat the water in the Great Lakes Basin as a tradable commodity, and to have jurisdiction over it be on a global basis rather than a regional or a local basis. And it's all of these pieces together advocate the proposition for smart growth.
Mr. Braisley, step right up.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, you know, getting back to cargo, have you thought of maybe making Gary primarily a cargo, 75% cargo and maybe 25% passenger with an intermodal facility for the brownfields?
Well, yeah, we're not, what we're doing, Mr. Braisley, is frankly, you know, not forgetting the private sector role in all this. I mean, we are going to be capable and flexible and be able to be responsive to market forces. If somebody comes in tomorrow, right, from the private sector and is prepared to talk about cargo operation, right, you know, we'll work with them. I think the key is for us to have the flexibility, again, not only for the short term, but at least the midterm, if not long term. And I am excited about this real-time inventory concept. I think we're going to see an increase rather than a decrease, and there we're getting less dependent upon large cargo planes. The fleet's being utilized, 737s, MD-80s, DC-8s. We're handling on a daily basis already. So I think flexibility is the key, and I don't dismiss either the cargo or the general aviation aspect, which I think is going to be a growth area as well.
Hi, my name is Grant Linsky, and my question to you is, as you're trying to attract passenger traffic to your airport, particularly from the city coming southward, and you've talked about rail, and you do have a rail service that comes down. Is there a plan on the board at this point in terms of how you interconnect the rail service and link it into the airport, and has that been worked out with the other side, I mean, with the rail line and with the city of Chicago? Are you able to elaborate on that?
Yeah, twofold. First of all, the rail line in question is the South Shore, which ends up at Randolph, I think, downtown Chicago, runs all the way out to South Bend. Currently, we have commuter bus connecting the station, which is a mile and change away from the terminal. There are plans on the board for a spur to be able to actually permit, you know, the train car. So you would be able to get on at the airport and take that directly into downtown Chicago with that piece, which is part of our planning process. But in addition to that, many of you may have been following to some extent increasing discussions on development of high-speed rail, which is an important piece to the puzzle. Gary is, in that system, identified as at the airport site as the junction between sort of the Chicago-Cleveland, Chicago-Detroit, and run down to Indianapolis and south, that those would connect on a high-speed basis at the airport as well. So all of that is very much in the mix. I'm not going to say on a drawing board, but on drawing boards.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Mayor. I'm Ross Amundson of Indiana American Water, and I'm a plant here. Is it true that Secretary Mineta in your recent meeting in Washington indicated that the Gary plan that's before the FAA could be completed in 1/2 the time of a runway at O'Hare or the phase 1 of the Piatone construction? And also, does that Gary plan allow for, when implemented, 15 million enplanements, which just happens to be 50% of the long-term needs that the Illinois Department of Transportation has identified?
Most plants throw up a softball. Remembering the question. Yeah, first of all, we had a very positive meeting with Secretary Mineta, who, thank God, is a former mayor, which permits greater connection. Our senators, Lugar and Bai, our governor, Frank O'Bannon, and myself, congressman from our district, Visclosky. And we did, and he did acknowledge certainly what we're talking about is much less within the regulatory environment and undertaking than a greenfield airport development, and includes the number of enplanements. I mean, I don't know specifically 15 million, but that is, permits a fairly dramatic, even with the most minimal phase of our plan, which is lengthening of our longest runway. The other pieces are lengthening, which is a more dramatic piece, of our crosswind runway, and then a parallel runway construction. But these are like in phases, 5, 10, 15-year segments out. But with moving extending the existing runway, just that piece alone permits a dramatic increase in the number of enplanements. And I mean, it's as it exists now. I think we're going to be cutting a ribbon of sorts on renovations to our terminal, which were pretty substantial. Is a competitive model. I'd like people to look at a comparison of if you get down there for some reason. I had to go to Evansville, Indiana, and it's about an hour and 15 minutes from Louisville International Airport, and they have an airport there. Now, ironically, to fly there, I had to go to O'Hare to fly to Evansville, but what it's a lot of runways and terminal, the whole 9 yards. They're not trying to be an international airport like Louisville, but they had about 4 or 5 carriers with about a half a dozen flights a day back to their respective hubs, whether it was the Delta connection or US Air, American Eagle, whatever it might be. And that didn't seem to be a bad model to look at. I mean, I don't think we should be always thinking, right, that a utilitarian airport, it has to be the O'Hare model. And I don't think we have to say, great, whatever we settle on, now let's sit down and wait for 20 years for it to happen. I think this gets back to the smart management of existing assets and resources. At the end of the day, that's what the people we serve expect of us. They don't expect miracles. They don't expect instant runways. They expect is common sense. And they expect keep the price as reasonable as you can keep it for us, whether it's buying a ticket on an airline or the taxes they pay in one shape, form, or another. If we do that, I think the model we're proposing, and I'm proud to say in partnership with the city of Chicago, I think it's the one that makes sense. And now, same time zone or not, I have a deputy mayor sitting back there anxiously awaiting my turn because I have the rare joy. We have a different form of government. It's a strong mayor form, and so we have more separation. And I'm going to make a rare appearance to my city council. One member who's here, our Councilwoman Marilyn Cruces from my district, the 1st District. So I want to thank you. I appreciate it.